The Velthri Dominion had conquered 47 species across 3 galactic arms, and they had never once tasted defeat in battle. Their warriors stood 9 feet tall with bodies covered in crystalline armor that grew from their own skin like beautiful and deadly shells. Plasma fire bounced off them like rain off stone, and their claws could tear through starship hulls as easily as a human might tear paper. High Commander Thyrak stood on the bridge of his battle cruiser and looked down at the small blue planet spinning slowly in the darkness of space. It was such a tiny world, covered mostly in water and wrapped in clouds that swirled like white ribbons across its surface. "What do we know about the dominant species?" Thyrak asked his science officer, his voice rumbling like distant thunder through the command deck. The science officer pulled up holographic images of strange creatures, soft-skinned beings with no armor, no claws, no natural weapons of any kind. They walked on 2 legs and had small dull teeth and eyes that faced forward like prey animals. "They call themselves humans, High Commander," the science officer reported with barely hidden amusement in his voice. "They are carbon-based life forms with an average lifespan of only 70 to 80 cycles around their star. They have no natural defenses, and their bodies are incredibly fragile." Thyrak let out a sound that passed for laughter among his kinda deep clicking noise that echoed through the bridge and made his officers join in with their own clicking sounds. "Fragile creatures on a small world," Thyrak said as he waved one massive clawed hand dismissively. "This will not even require a full invasion force. Send 1 cruiser down to their largest population centers and demand their surrender. We will have them in the labor camps before the next cycle begins." His officers rushed to obey because no one questioned the High Commander. He had personally led the conquest of 12 worlds and had never lost a single battle in his 300 years of service to the Dominion. The battle cruiser descended through the clouds of Earth on a bright morning, its shadow falling across a coastal city of millions like a dark omen of things to come. The humans below looked up at the massive ship, and Thyrak watched their faces on his viewing screens with cold satisfaction. He saw fear in their eyes, the same fear he had seen in 47 other species. When the Dominion arrived to claim their worlds, it was always the same, and it always ended the same way. "Broadcast the standard message," Thyrak commanded, and his communications officer sent out the words that had broken so many civilizations before. "Surrender your world to the Velthri Dominion or face complete destruction. You have 1 planetary rotation to comply." Thyrak expected immediate panic and quick surrender. That was how it always worked with primitive species who had never faced a superior force. They would see the power of the Dominion and fall to their knees. But the first sign that something was different came within hours. Instead of surrender messages, the humans sent back weapons fire. Primitive chemical rockets and explosive shells began striking the cruiser's shields, doing no real damage, but showing a defiance that surprised the Velthri officers. "They are attacking us?" one officer asked in confusion. "Do they not understand that their weapons cannot hurt us?" Thyrak felt a small flicker of annoyance, but nothing more. Sometimes primitive species needed to be taught a lesson before they would submit. "Destroy their military installations," he ordered. "Show them what happens to those who defy the Dominion." The cruiser's weapons lit up the sky with purple fire, and human military bases exploded into flames and rubble. Tanks and aircraft and soldiers vanished in seconds. Under the overwhelming power of Velthri technology, Thyrak watched the destruction with satisfaction and waited for the surrender. That would surely come now. It did not come. Instead, the attacks on his forces grew more intense. Human soldiers poured out of the burning city and engaged Velthri ground troops with a ferocity that shocked the crystal-armored warriors. The first reports from the surface confused Thyrak because they made no logical sense. "High Commander, our soldiers report that the humans continue fighting even after sustaining fatal injuries." A field commander reported, with something unfamiliar in his voice. Was it uncertainty? Or perhaps even fear? "That is impossible," Thyrak replied. "No creature can fight after receiving a fatal wound. I am only reporting what our warriors are seeing, High Commander." One human soldier was shot through the chest and continued firing his weapon for another 10 minutes, before finally falling. Another had his arm completely severed and used his remaining hand to detonate an explosive device. That killed 3 of our warriors. Thyrek dismissed these reports as exaggerations from inexperienced soldiers. But as the hours passed, more and more similar accounts came flooding in. The humans were not surrendering. They were not retreating. They were not behaving like any conquered species the Dominion had ever encountered. 72 hours after the invasion began, Thyrek found himself doing something he had never done in 300 years of warfare. He called for reinforcements. Send 3 more cruisers and 12,000 shock troops, he ordered through gritted teeth, his crystalline armor clicking with agitation. These creatures are more troublesome than anticipated. His admirals back at Dominion Command were surprised by the request, but granted it without question. Surely the legendary Thyrek would crush these primitive beings soon enough. As Thyrek waited for his reinforcements, he studied the battlefield reports with growing unease. Something was very wrong with these humans, something his tactical databases could not explain. They fought like cornered animals with nothing to lose, but they also fought with strategy and cunning that suggested intelligence far beyond what their primitive technology indicated. They learned from every engagement, adapting their tactics within hours to counter Velthri advantages. One report particularly disturbed him: a group of human civilians, not soldiers, but ordinary people who had never held weapons before, had organized an ambush that killed 15 Velthri warriors using nothing but primitive explosive traps and sharp metal weapons. What kind of species is this? Thyrek muttered to himself as he stared at the blue planet below. What kind of creatures refuse to accept defeat even when defeat is certain? He did not know it yet, but he was about to learn the answer to that question, and the lesson would cost him everything he had ever believed about war and conquest, and the nature of inferior species. The humans were about to teach the mighty Velthri Dominion something it had never learned in all its centuries of galactic conquest: that some species cannot be broken, and some worlds cannot be taken, no matter how powerful the invader might be. The reinforcements arrived 3 days later, 3 massive battlecruisers that darkened the sky like storm clouds, carrying 12,000 of the Dominion's most elite shock troops in their armored bellies. High Commander Thyrek felt his confidence return as he watched the fresh warriors descend to the surface in their drop pods. These were not ordinary soldiers, but the finest killers the Velthri had ever produced, each one trained from birth to destroy and conquer. Surround the city, Thyrek commanded from his flagship. Cut off every road, every tunnel, every possible escape route. Let nothing enter and nothing leave. We will starve them out if we cannot burn them out. His officers obeyed with renewed enthusiasm, because surely now, with overwhelming force at their command, these stubborn humans would finally break. The siege began in earnest as Velthri forces formed an unbreakable ring around the coastal city. Supply lines were cut, communication towers were destroyed, and the humans were trapped like insects in a jar. Thyrek's tactical officers calculated that the humans would be forced to surrender within 2 weeks at most. They had limited food, limited ammunition, and limited medical supplies. The mathematics of warfare clearly showed that their defeat was inevitable, but the humans had never been good at mathematics when it came to war. On the 5th day of the siege, something impossible happened. The humans attacked. Not a desperate breakout attempt, not a last stand of doomed warriors, but a coordinated offensive that struck at 3 Velthri positions simultaneously. With devastating precision, they came out of the sewers beneath the city, rising from manholes and drainage pipes like ghosts from the underworld. They came from buildings that Velthri scanners had marked as completely destroyed, emerging from hidden basements and secret tunnels. They came at night, during a thunderstorm, when Velthri sensors were partially blinded by the electrical interference. Thyrek watched the battle unfold on his tactical display with a mixture of fury and something he refused to call fear. Human soldiers charged directly at Velthri positions, firing their primitive weapons and throwing explosive devices with terrifying accuracy. When their ammunition ran out, they drew knives and fought hand-to-hand with warriors twice their size. "How are they still fighting?" Thyrek demanded. "Our intelligence said their military was destroyed." "These are not all military personnel, High Commander," his intelligence officer replied with a tremor in his voice. "Many of them appear to be civilians, teachers, factory workers, Shopkeepers who have taken up weapons. Thyrak could not comprehend what he was hearing. In every other species the Dominion had conquered, civilians fled from battle or surrendered immediately. They did not pick up weapons and charge at professional soldiers. But the most disturbing reports came from the medical units treating wounded Velthri warriors. "High Commander, you need to see this," the chief medical officer said, and his voice carried a note of horror that made Thyrak's crystalline armor shift uncomfortably. The medical officer showed him footage captured during the night's battle. A human soldier had been shot through the stomach, a wound that should have killed him instantly. But instead of falling, he kept running. His face was twisted in agony, and his blood was pouring out of the wound. But he continued forward for another 100 meters, before finally collapsing on top of a Velthri position, where he detonated grenades strapped to his chest. Their bodies produce a chemical compound during extreme stress, the medical officer explained. They call it adrenaline, and it allows them to ignore pain and continue functioning even with mortal injuries. We have documented cases of humans fighting for 10, 15, even 20 minutes after receiving wounds that should have killed them instantly. Thyrak felt something cold settle in his chest, something he had never experienced before. In 300 years of warfare, there's more, High Commander, the medical officer continued. Their fear response is unlike anything in our databases. When most species experience extreme fear, they freeze or flee. But humans become more dangerous when they are afraid. Their fear makes them faster and stronger and more aggressive. That makes no sense, Thyrak protested. Fear is a survival mechanism designed to prevent creatures from engaging in dangerous behavior. For most species, yes, the medical officer agreed. But humans evolved on a death world, a planet where everything was trying to kill them. Their ancestors had to fight predators, survive extreme weather, and compete against other human tribes for limited resources. They evolved to channel their fear into aggression, because running away was not always an option on their world. Thyrak ordered a new assault the next morning, throwing 5,000 fresh troops against the human positions. He was determined to break them through sheer overwhelming force. The assault lasted 12 hours and cost him 800 warriors. The humans held their ground with a stubbornness that bordered on insanity. They turned every building into a fortress and every street into a killing field. They used their knowledge of the city's layout to set ambushes and traps that caught Velthri squads in crossfires from multiple directions. And when the Velthri finally managed to capture a building, they found it rigged with explosives. Human defenders would wait until the last moment, until Velthri soldiers were inside, and then detonate the entire structure, killing themselves along with the invaders. An elderly human woman was captured during one such assault, a frail creature with white hair and wrinkled skin who should have been too old to fight. But she had killed 3 Velthri warriors with a chemical explosive before being subdued. When Thyrak interrogated her, demanding to know why she had not simply surrendered, she looked at him with eyes that burned with hatred and spoke words that would haunt him for the rest of his life. "You killed my grandson in the first attack," she said in a voice as cold as the void between stars. "He was 7 years old, and he was hiding in a school when your weapons destroyed it. I watched the building burn with him inside." "That is unfortunate," Thyrak said, trying to maintain his composure. "But surely you must see that continued resistance is pointless. You cannot win." The old woman smiled, a terrible expression that showed her small human teeth, and she laughed at him. "You think this is about winning?" she asked. "No, monster. This is about making you pay for every life you have taken. This is about teaching you that human lives have a price, and that price is your blood. I do not need to win. I only need to make sure that conquering our world costs you more than it is worth." Thyrak had her executed, but her words echoed in his mind as the days turned into weeks, and the weeks turned into months. The humans would not stop fighting, and he was beginning to understand that they never would. Months passed, and then years, and the war that Thyrak had expected to end in days stretched on without any sign of ending. The Velthri Dominion now controlled every major city on Earth. Their ships dominated the skies, and their soldiers patrolled the streets. By every standard measure of warfare, the humans had been completely defeated. But the killing never stopped. Attacks came every day, sometimes every hour, from humans who emerged from places No civilized species would ever hide. They came from forests so dense that Valkyrie sensors could not penetrate them. They came from mountain caves and underground tunnels and swamps filled with poisonous creatures. They came from the sewers beneath the cities, where they had built entire hidden communities that the Valkyrie did not even know existed. Thyrak had captured the planet, but he was beginning to realize that he would never truly conquer it. One night, a group of human fighters attacked a Valkyrie supply depot, killing 40 guards and destroying enough equipment to supply an entire battalion. When Valkyrie reinforcements arrived, they found a message painted on the wall in the blood of the fallen soldiers. The message contained only 2 words, "Remember Chicago." Thyrak demanded to know what this message meant, and his intelligence officers eventually discovered the answer. Chicago had been one of the first human cities destroyed in the invasion. Its entire population of 10 million people killed in a single day of orbital bombardment. They are still fighting because of something we did 2 years ago? Thyrak asked in disbelief. Do they not understand that holding onto the past is pointless? That is the problem, High Commander, his chief intelligence officer replied with a weary voice. Humans do not forget. Their entire species is built around the concept of memory and revenge. They pass their grudges down from generation to generation like treasured possessions. The officer showed Thyrak evidence that made his crystalline armor crack with tension. Human children were being taught about the invasion from the moment they could understand language. They were shown images of destroyed cities and dead relatives, and told to remember the faces of Valkyrie commanders. They were being raised as soldiers in a war that might continue for centuries. We captured a human school teacher last week, the officer reported. She was teaching her students about something called the Siege of Leningrad, a battle that happened on their world nearly 100 years before any of them were born. The humans still remembered it, still honored the people who died in it, still used it as inspiration to keep fighting against impossible odds. Thyrak felt something he had never felt before, a cold dread that settled deep in his bones. He had conquered species that held grudges. Every species remembered its defeats and resented its conquerors. But given enough time, they always forgot and accepted their new place in the Dominion. But humans were different. Humans built monuments to their dead. Humans wrote songs about ancient battles. Humans told stories of heroes and villains that were thousands of years old. They would never forget, and they would never forgive. There is more, the intelligence officer continued. We have intercepted communications between human resistance cells across the planet. They are organizing. High Commander, what began as scattered groups of survivors has become a coordinated global insurgency. The officer displayed a map of Earth covered in red dots, each dot representing a confirmed human resistance cell. There were thousands of them, connected by hidden communication networks that the Valkyrie had not been able to fully break. They call themselves the Children of Earth, the officer explained, and they have adopted a symbol, a human hand holding a burning torch. They wear it on their clothing and paint it on walls and tattoo it on their skin. It has become a mark of defiance that humans across the planet recognize. Thyrak ordered increased patrols and harsher punishments for captured insurgents, but nothing seemed to work. For every human fighter he killed, 2 more seemed to take their place. And then the resistance captured something that changed everything. A squad of Valkyrie soldiers went missing during a routine patrol in what had once been a major European city. 3 days later, their bodies were found arranged in a public square, stripped of their armor and weapons. But one soldier was not among the dead, a young warrior named Keth, who had been captured alive. Thyrak launched a massive operation to recover the captured soldier, but the humans moved him constantly, keeping him 1 step ahead of every rescue attempt. They sent video messages showing Keth alive and unharmed, which confused the Valkyrie commanders greatly. Why have they not killed him? Thyrak demanded. What do they want? The answer came in the form of a message from a human woman, who identified herself only as the commander of the torch. We have your soldier, she said in a recorded transmission that was broadcast on every frequency the humans could access. He is alive and he will remain alive. We are not monsters like you. We do not slaughter prisoners. Thyrak watched the message with a mixture of confusion and contempt. If you wish to negotiate for his return, we are willing to talk, the woman continued. We want nothing more than peace, and the departure of every Valkyrie ship from our system. Give us our world back, and we will give you your soldier. Continue this war, and we will continue to make you bleed. Thyrak refused to negotiate with what he considered primitive terrorists, but the message had an unexpected effect on his troops. Valkyrie soldiers began to whisper among themselves. They talked about the fact that the humans had shown mercy when they had been shown none. They wondered if perhaps these strange, soft creatures were not as primitive as they had been told. And that was when Thyrak realized the true danger of what the humans had done. They had not just captured a soldier, they had planted a seed of doubt in the minds of his warriors. They had shown that they could be merciful, which made the Valkyrie ask themselves why they could not be merciful in return. The humans were fighting a war on multiple fronts, not just with weapons, but with ideas. And ideas, Thyrak was beginning to understand, could be far more dangerous than any bomb or bullet. The war entered its third year, and Thyrak had been given the largest military deployment in the entire history of the Valkyrie Dominion, 40 battle cruisers orbiting the planet, and 200,000 soldiers occupying its surface. It should have been enough to crush any resistance. It should have been enough to break any species. The combined firepower under his command could glass the entire planet and turn it into a lifeless rock. But High Commander Thyrak had learned something terrible in 3 years of fighting humans. He could destroy their world, but he could never conquer it. He could kill millions of them, but he could never break their spirit. And now something even worse was happening, something that threatened to destroy the Dominion's forces from within. It started with small things that the officers dismissed as battlefield stress. Valkyrie soldiers began refusing orders to execute human prisoners. Supply units started losing food shipments that somehow ended up in human refugee camps. Patrol squads would report areas as clear when intelligence clearly showed human activity. Thyrak launched an investigation and discovered a truth so disturbing that he kept it secret from everyone except his most trusted advisors. Valkyrie soldiers were defecting to the human side. The first confirmed defector was a young warrior named Veth who had been captured during a failed raid on a human stronghold. She had been missing for 6 months and was assumed dead, until reconnaissance drones spotted her fighting alongside human insurgents, wearing their symbol of the burning torch and carrying human weapons. "This is impossible," Thyrak said when he saw the footage. "No Valkyrie has ever betrayed the Dominion. Our loyalty is absolute." But more defectors appeared over the following weeks, dozens of them, then hundreds. Some were captured soldiers who had been converted, but others had left voluntarily, slipping away from their units in the night to join the human resistance. Thyrak ordered the capture of any defector possible, determined to understand how the humans had corrupted his warriors. They managed to capture 3 defectors during a raid, 2 males and 1 female, all of them decorated veterans who had served the Dominion faithfully for over a century. The interrogations revealed something that Thyrak could not comprehend, no matter how many times he heard it. "They showed us kindness," one defector said, "and there were tears in his eyes, tears that Valkyrie were not supposed to be capable of producing. I was wounded during a battle and left for dead by my unit. A human found me a female medic, and instead of killing me, she treated my wounds. She gave me water and food and stayed with me through the night. She was probably trying to extract information," Thyrak suggested. But the defector shook his head violently. "No, she asked nothing of me. When I was strong enough to walk, she let me go. She could have turned me over to her commanders for interrogation, but instead she pointed me toward Valkyrie lines and wished me well." The defector's voice broke with emotion as he continued his story. "I went back to my unit, but I could not stop thinking about her. I had been taught my entire life that other species were inferior, that they existed only to serve or be destroyed. But she showed me more compassion in one night than any Valkyrie had shown me in 100 years of service." Another defector told a similar story. He had been trapped in a collapsed building with a group of human civilians during an artillery bombardment. Instead of killing him, the humans had shared their limited supplies with him and worked together to dig a way out. "We spent 3 days in that rubble," he said. "I learned their names. I heard their stories. A human child drew a picture for me because she said I looked sad. When we finally escaped, the adult humans let me go even though they knew I would return to fight against them. The female defector had the most remarkable story of all. "I was part of an execution squad," she admitted with shame in her voice. "We were ordered to kill a village of human civilians as punishment for harboring insurgents. I followed orders and helped murder over 300 people, men, women, children, all of them unarmed and helpless." She paused, and Thyrak saw her crystalline armor shaking with emotion. "But one child survived, a male infant whose mother had hidden him beneath the bodies. When I found him, he should have been terrified. He should have screamed at the sight of the monster who had killed everyone he knew." Tears flowed freely down her face now. Instead, he smiled at me and reached for my hand. He was hungry and afraid and alone, but he looked at me with complete trust. "I could not kill him, High Commander. I could not kill something so innocent and so willing to love even its enemy." She had taken the child and fled into the wilderness, where human resistance fighters had found them. Instead of executing her for her crimes, they had listened to her story and offered her a chance at redemption. "They forgave me," she whispered. "After everything I had done, they forgave me and accepted me as one of their own." "How is that possible, High Commander? How can any species have such capacity for mercy?" Thyrak had no answer because he was beginning to understand something terrifying. The humans were not just fighting a war, they were fighting for the souls of his soldiers. They were using love and compassion and forgiveness as weapons more powerful than any bomb or plasma rifle. Every act of kindness was a recruitment tool. Every life spared was an investment in future betrayal. The humans were turning his own warriors against him by simply being decent to them. And the worst part was that Thyrak could not counter this weapon because he did not understand it. He had been trained to fight armies, not to fight love. He knew how to destroy cities, not how to compete with compassion. His entire understanding of warfare was based on strength and fear and dominance. But the humans fought with hope and kindness and the unbreakable belief that even their enemies could become their friends. It was the most dangerous weapon Thyrak had ever faced, and he had no defense against it. The order to withdraw came on a cold morning in the 4th year of the war, delivered by holographic messenger from the Dominion High Council itself. "High Commander Thyrak, you are ordered to cease all military operations on the planet designated Earth and return all forces to Dominion space immediately. This order is not subject to debate or delay." Thyrak stood alone on the bridge of his flagship and felt the weight of those words, crushing down on him like a physical force. He had never retreated from a battle in 300 years of service, and now he was being ordered to abandon a war that had cost the Dominion more than any campaign in its entire history. 112,000 Velthri warriors were dead, killed by a species that the Dominion had dismissed as primitive and weak. Thousands more had defected to the enemy, turning their weapons against their former brothers. The greatest military force ever assembled had been stopped cold by creatures who fought with chemical weapons and sharpened metal. The withdrawal took 3 weeks as Velthri forces pulled back from positions they had held for years. Human resistance fighters watched from the shadows, not attacking, simply waiting to make sure their enemies were truly leaving. On the final day, as the last transport lifted off from Earth's surface, Thyrak received a message on an open channel, a message from the woman who called herself the Commander of the Torch. "You came to our world with fire and death," she said, and her voice carried across the void of space like a blade. "You killed millions of our people and burned our cities to ash. You thought we were weak because we were small and soft and short-lived." Thyrak listened in silence, unable to look away from the image of the blue planet growing smaller in his viewport. "But we are not weak, monster. We are survivors. Our world tried to kill us every day for millions of years with ice ages and volcanoes and plagues and predators, and we refused to die. We climbed out of the mud and conquered our planet and reached for the stars, and nothing in the universe can stop us." The woman paused, and when she spoke again, her voice had changed from cold fury to something almost like pity. "Go home, Velthri. Tell your masters what you found here. Tell them that Earth is not for conquest. Tell them that humanity remembers its enemies and repays every wrong, no matter how long it takes." The transmission ended, and Thyrak was left alone with the silence of space and the bitter taste of defeat. The journey back to Dominion space took months, and during that time, Thyrak began to write. He needed to understand what had happened, needed to explain to himself and to others why the mightiest military force in the galaxy had been stopped by primitive creatures on a small blue world. He called his work the Human Paradox, and it would become the most controversial document in Dominion history. When Thyrak arrived home, he was immediately stripped of his rank and titles. The High Council blamed him for the failure, unwilling to accept that the defeat was not due to poor leadership, but to something far more fundamental. They exiled him to a distant moon, where he spent his remaining years in isolation. But his writings survived. Copies of the Human Paradox spread through underground networks. Despite being banned by the Council, the document began with words that would become famous across 100 star systems. They are not the strongest species in the galaxy. They are not the fastest or the most intelligent. Their technology is primitive and their bodies are fragile. They die easily and live briefly and fight with weapons made of chemical fire and sharpened metal. And yet they cannot be conquered. Thyrak wrote about human biology, about the adrenaline that let them fight through mortal wounds, and the fear response that made them more dangerous instead of less. He wrote about their evolution on a death world that had forged them into something unique. Among all the species of the galaxy, they will fight when victory is impossible, he continued. They will sacrifice themselves for strangers and die for abstract concepts like freedom and justice. They will adapt to any environment and any weapon and any tactic, because adaptation is what kept their ancestors alive on a planet that was trying to kill them. He wrote about human memory, their terrifying ability to hold grudges for generations and pass their hatred down to children who had never experienced the original wrong. They remember everything, Thyrak warned. They build monuments to their dead and tell stories about ancient battles and teach their children to never forget. Make an enemy of a human, and you make an enemy of everyone who comes after them for as long as their species exists. But the most disturbing section of Thyrak's document was about human compassion, their inexplicable ability to love their enemies and turn monsters into brothers. They will show kindness to those who least deserve it, he wrote. They will forgive crimes that should be unforgivable. They will share their food with prisoners and treat the wounds of enemy soldiers. And in doing so, they will steal the loyalty of your warriors more effectively than any propaganda or bribery ever could. The final section of the Human Paradox became its most quoted passage, repeated in council chambers and military academies across the galaxy. Do not engage humanity. Do not invade their worlds or threaten their colonies. Do not give them reason to remember you as an enemy, not because they will defeat you, though they might, but because even in victory, you will be forever changed by what you see. You will learn what it means to face a species that was forged in fire and blood and endless struggle. You will understand why the oldest races in the galaxy sealed their borders. When humans first reached the stars, you will learn why even legends fear them. Centuries passed after the failed invasion of Earth, and humanity expanded peacefully across the galaxy. They built colonies and space stations and trading posts, and everywhere they went, other species treated them with careful respect. Not because humans were loved, they were too strange for that, too unpredictable, too capable of both terrible violence and overwhelming kindness, but because every species in the galaxy had read Thyrak's warning, and every species had decided that it was better to be friends with humanity than to be their enemy. The humans had won more than a war. They had won the respect and fear of an entire galaxy, not through conquest or domination, but by simply refusing to break when breaking was the only logical choice. And in the end, that was the greatest lesson of all, that courage and stubbornness and the capacity for love could overcome any force, no matter how powerful. The stars belonged to those who dared to reach for them, and no species had ever dared more than humanity.